Hi, friends. You are listening to the EntreEd Talk podcast, where we feature amazing educators and entrepreneurs showcasing how you can bring entrepreneurship into the classroom. We believe entrepreneurship is for everyone. I am your host, Toy Hirschman, and I am so glad you chose to join me on this journey. Let's go. Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the EntreEd Talk podcast. I am so excited to have my new friend and teacher, Kelvin Chin, on the podcast today. Kelvin is an international stress management and meditation expert, as well as an author of some incredible books. He runs his business as a nonprofit, and I am so excited for this conversation. Welcome, Kelvin.
Great to be here, Tori. Great to be here with you.
I'm so excited about this. This is wonderful. Can you, as we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your own journey and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, well, born and raised in Boston, a suburb of Boston. Went to college up in New Hampshire, graduate school in Connecticut, went to law school in Boston. But along the way, I got very, very stressed out. And I was 19 years old, and that's when I learned to meditate. Primarily because I was so anxious. I very high anxiety level, and I needed something to help me. And I was really worried I was going to flunk out of Dartmouth. That's the truth of it. And it was my second year, my sophomore year, and I stumbled into a lecture hall, bottom line, and I learned to meditate. Back then, I learned TM, Transcendental Meditation, and it was taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who taught the Beatles in the late 60s and so forth. So I learned to teach TM, and I studied with him personally for, a number of years, 71, 73, 1973, and then I was an international leader in his organization for about 10 years. They went off in a different direction, so I stayed focused on teaching meditation and kind of been doing my thing since after those first 10 years. You know, when I started thinking about maybe having a family, I decided that, I didn't decide. I realized that I needed to get a job to make more money to support a family than just teaching meditation at the time. So after those 10 years or so, came back. I've had a varied career. People look me up on LinkedIn. You're just like, how many careers has this guy had? I'm not going to go through the whole laundry list, but bottom line is, I got into tax consulting. I went to law school. I was in law firms for a while, but I've always had this entrepreneurial thing. So even when I was, I got out of law firms doing tax consulting and working back in law firms, I was on the sales and marketing end of things. So that's how I raised a family with that kind of career path, working in law firms as a former lawyer, but as a current sales and marketing head for a large for-profit organization. Meanwhile, the whole time I'd been teaching meditation on the side. So now it's my 50th year teaching this year. Even though I had all these other jobs, I had a side business going on. I didn't think of it as a side business, but since this is an entrepreneurial group, it was a side business. There's a phrase for that. They call that anyway.
Your side hustle. Your side hustle.
Side hustle. That's right. I had a side hustle. Never, it's a funny phrase, but I had a side hustle going on the whole time. And a lot of the lawyers I worked with didn't even know that I was teaching meditation, but they'd say, how are you so chill? How do you manage? Like, we just did this big deal and all this crazy stuff was going on. And I said, well, I meditate. And they would beg me to teach them, even though I was kind of maxed out time-wise. I'd find a time to continue teaching on the side a little bit, and so now, as you know, I've been doing this now full-time for about 10 years now. About 10 years ago, I started my officially, created a nonprofit and so forth, and we can talk about how that works and so forth and so on. But that's basically the kind of the overview.
That's incredible. I want to just share with our audience, because you are a very different guest in a good way. But we've never had anyone like you on the show before. And you mentioned that you are a nonprofit. So what made you decide to do that? And how does that work? Do you have a board? Do you have
advisors? How did you set that up?
Yeah. So the reason I did it, and of course, the audience is diverse, as you and I have discussed, because I asked you about who the audience is here who's listening to this. And so some of this may apply and some of this may not apply to people. But for me, as I just gave you the overview, I'm now at the place in my life where my kids are older, they're supporting themselves. So I'm not supporting my kids anymore. So my income needs are much, much less, right? So I am basically, in a nutshell, figured out my budget, my personal budget, so that whatever I have in retirement income basically covers all of my basic needs. What do you need? Food, shelter, gas for my car. I don't need any more clothes, I mean, you know what I mean? I got plenty of clothes and so forth, minor clothes additions every once in a while, but I don't have to get a new suit like I used to when I worked in the firms and all that stuff. So I have very minimal needs is the point, and I'm debt free. So I don't have any debt. I own my car. My car's 14 years old. I got a nice Lexus that's 14 years old. It's got 150,000 miles on it, and it works like it's a new car. So I was like, why do I need a new car? Plus, it's a Lexus SUV, so the advantage of those is they all kind of look alike. So nobody can tell how old my car is unless you look like it's obviously not 3 years old, but is it 14 years old, or is it 10 years old? Is it 12 years old? It's like, I can't tell. So, I'm low maintenance from a budget standpoint, from a personal standpoint. So I thought, well, look what I'm doing. I'm helping people with meditation and reducing their anxiety. I'm helping people, as you know, with overcoming the fear of death. So I have my nonprofit is set up as I have an umbrella. So first of all, could I do a nonprofit? I mean, I guess that's the threshold question everybody needs to ask if they're thinking about doing a nonprofit. Do you have a nonprofit mission? So you got to legitimately set up a nonprofit with a mission that's, meets the IRS standards for nonprofits. So mine is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit educational organization. So what do? I am educating. This is what I've been doing for 50 years. So I just set up the nonprofit 10 years ago, but for 50 years, I've been doing this educational work, educating people, teaching meditation. I taught the first meditation courses, as you know, in the history of the U.S. Army, in Korea, all the Army bases up on the DMZ, first meditation courses in the history of West Point Military Academy, and so forth. So I've been educating people and teaching people for all these years, even though I've had my main hustle, we call it, of working in law firms for a number of decades. So it just fit for me to create this mission of helping people reduce their stress and anxiety. And this is not verbatim, but basically this is my mission of my nonprofit, and also to help people worldwide reducing and overcoming their fears about death and dying. So that's my nonprofit mission in a nutshell. I have one nonprofit, of course, those of you who don't know, when you file with the IRS, they want one website, they want one name of your nonprofit. They don't want all the DBAs, the doing business as, right? So my nonprofit, at that point, I didn't know what I would call my other sub nonprofits, you could call them. So I just gave them my name. So my main nonprofit is kelvinchin.org. That's my main website that the IRS has. And in Texas, where I was living, 10 years ago when I did this, go to the state, Secretary of State's office and so forth, and I have a number of DBAs underneath it. My Turning Within Foundation and Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation are the DBAs underneath it, basically. And I have a number of other names and so forth. If you wanted, like Turning Within just itself is, whatever. Turning Within Foundation is another DBA. So you can do all that. That's at the state level. The IRS doesn't care about any of that stuff. And when you go to the bank, you set it up, you bring in your papers, you prove it to them and so forth, and you set up nonprofit bank accounts.
That's really interesting because I run a nonprofit, but I didn't have to set it up.
Yeah. So it's not complicated to do. If people are interested in setting it up, it's not hard to do. Really, you just go online of your state, and first the IRS, but then in your state, and Secretary of State, and they really literally walk you through it. And that's I'd never done it before, and I walked myself through it, and it was very easy to do. Didn't have to hire anybody, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing, tip for people about the nonprofit, to kind of go full circle to what I started to tell you, because my budget, my personal budget, is minimal, right? I live off of my retirement income. I don't take a salary all the time from my nonprofit. It depends on what I feel like doing, because I don't really need the money. But will I take a salary sometimes from a nonprofit? Yes. Why? Because I can take it now, during a taxable year, right? I'm in the calendar year like most people are. I don't have some special fiscal year. But during the calendar year, say, before December 31st, I'll take a lump sum small payment, because my tax implications are typically zero, or very close to, very little. We may have to pay some FICA, because you're taking it, was it under Schedule C, I think, the business income, whatever schedule it is. And so so most of my money, back to the tips for people, most of the money that I make teaching people to meditate and so forth, and I do occasionally do some private sessions on fear of death for people, but most of the time I'm doing free sessions. So that's another, I give this to the public worldwide. I have clients in 60 countries. And so I do a free phone session with anybody in any part of the world, whatever, on any subject, that topic that comes up as it relates to my nonprofits. And so pretty much they can talk to me about any problems they have, and I give them a free session. So, but I do charge fees, and there is a fee schedule, and that money goes into my nonprofit account, and it sits there, and I don't have to pay taxes on it, because it has been under $50,000 a year. That's the cutoff typically, right? So before you have to start filing a 990 and so forth, you can just do a postcard. Those of you who don't know, it's not even a postcard. They call it a postcard, but it's all online. You just go boom, boom. I made under $50,000 in revenue this year. You're done. Literally, that's the filing. That's how fast the filing is. But if you make over 50,000, which I think I might this year or something, then I got to file a 990, which is still fairly easy to do. But my point is that since I don't need the money personally, why take the money in a big salary unnecessarily and have to pay taxes on it? I just let it sit. And then when I travel to speak and to teach, those are business expenses. So those are business expenses that come directly out of my nonprofit bank account to reimburse me as the employee of the sole employee of the nonprofit. So there's no taxable consequences there in terms of income, because it's not income, it's a reimbursement of a business expense.
That's really cool. I didn't know all of that. And especially since you're the only employee, that's an interesting way to do it. It makes sense though.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something that I think probably our listeners will want to know. If those of you who know me, who've been listening to this podcast, know that I'm a little bit of a stress person. Stress and anxiety are not unfamiliar to me. And so that's how I reached out. I found your information, and I reached out to you, and just absolutely just loved our conversation, and then ended up being a student with you in one of your cohorts. But I never thought about, probably my entire life up until the point of meeting you, meditation meant you have to quiet your mind. And I wanted you to share your take on that, because it really, really changed the way that I look at and think about meditation. And every time I tell somebody that I meditate, they're like, well, I couldn't do that. I can't quiet my mind.
Right. Yeah, that's what most people think, because they have a misunderstanding about meditation. It's a fundamental misunderstanding, and it's an understandable misunderstanding, but let me kind of clarify. So, can your mind get quieter from meditating? Yes. Is the technique to help your mind get quieter, to quiet the mind? Absolutely no. So it's like, I would tell people, if an alien came down to planet Earth from another planet, I just made this story up from a teaching standpoint about 3-4 years ago, right around the beginning of COVID. I just had this, this is a great way to teach this. If an alien came from another planet, and from a planet just like ours, looks just like Earth, buildings, the people look at the same. Some of them have hair. People can't see that I have shaved head, but anyway, so, but, look just like us on Earth, same clothes, cars, the whole thing, except they don't sleep. And they get into car accidents. They go to Trader Joe's. They'll drive 2, 3, 4, 5 miles down the road. They'll get into 5 or 10 car accidents on the way there, on the way back. And it's just the norm. And their insurance premiums are through the roof on that planet. And they come here to visit and they go, well, how do you guys get there without banging into each other? And you say, well, you have a conversation with them. You realize that they don't sleep. They've never slept in their lives. Well, and so maybe you think, well, I'm going to teach them how to sleep. So what do? You tell them to lie down on this thing we call a bed, put your head on this thing we call a pillow, close your eyes. And then what do you tell them? You don't tell them, focus on your feet, focus on your body relaxing, focus on, just quieting the mind. No, because if you told them that, they'd stay awake all night, right? And yet we do the same thing with meditation. It's analogous. Why do we tell people that when that is going to actually make their mind more active? Trying always creates more activity in the mind, not less. Any controlling effort, trying to do anything, trying to relax, trying to quiet the mind is going to make the mind not quiet. So my approach is to instead, is what I call my meditation. I call it turning within meditation. Turning within, teach people how to turn within and use this technique that basically is reminding the mind to be in an undirected state. That's the summary of, that's not the technique, but that's the summary of what the technique involves, basically, without the specifics of the technique that I'd have to walk the people through step by step. But that's it. And if you can allow our mind to be in an undirected state, it's automatically going to go in, and that's going to naturally create a more settled state, but not trying to settle the mind. Trying to settle the mind is going to make the mind more active. It's counterproductive, right?
Yep, it makes sense, because that's what, and that's why I ended up working with you, because that's what you always hear. And I think I said to you, well, mine, I've got like a crazy serial killer running around up in there.
And it's okay. It's okay. We let him or her or it run around. We don't interfere. I tell people it's like you're in a current. I mean, you're in a river that it has a current in it, a stream. You don't fight the current. You go with the current. That's what we need to do when we're meditating, is not fight. But most people are taught to resist that. And that what we resist persists, and not, it just doesn't just persist, it increases. So it's counterproductive. So it's really a misapplication. I've thought about this for 52 years. I've been meditating now, right? So I've thought about this, and I've distilled it down to one sentence. And that sentence is that it's a misapplication of waking state rules in meditation. Why would you use waking state rules in meditation where you wouldn't use waking state rules to teach somebody to sleep?
Makes sense. It works for me. I'm a much happier person.
There you go. It's easy.
Still working on it, but
it's easy. It's easy. It's easy. It makes it easy. It should be easy. It should be easy to meditate. If it's not easy to meditate, then the person is meditating incorrectly. It's not necessary for it to be difficult. It shouldn't be difficult. Look, I've taught Buddhist monks to meditate, and I don't tell them not to do their difficult Buddhist meditation at their monastery. I just said, do this, I'm teaching you, and then go back, do this in the morning and in the afternoon, 10 to 15 minutes each time. That's all you need to do, morning and afternoon or early evening, and then go about doing your day. And in their day, as they're meditating, doing some Buddhist meditation all day, they would all come back to me and say, wow, I'm getting so much more out of our Buddhist meditation now at the monastery. I said, yeah, it's great. I didn't tell them why. I just was respectful and said, that's great. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'm not interfering with your beliefs or your practice or whatever that you're doing outside of what I taught you. But the reason is because they were not straining so much in their Buddhist meditation, and they got more out of it.
It's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
When you had your first, I don't know if they were called customers, because you said like it sort of happened organically, right? You were the example, and other people saw that and were like, how do I get what he has? Do you work to grow your customer base, or does it just happen? How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, back in the day when I was in college and I started teaching meditation and giving lectures, I put literally, this was back in the 70s, so a few years before computers, just posters. I did posters and newsletters. I did the old poster and newsletter thing. And that's how people would hear, and then word of mouth and so forth, right? But now it's all internet, and I have websites, and I've done a lot of podcasts. I don't know, I'm somewhere 80 or 90 podcasts now or something, somewhere in that range. And, a lot of newspaper and journal articles. And, I've been in Business Insider, which has a very high hit rate, right? Because Business Insider has got such a high credibility rate. Another tip for people is you want to get higher up on the Google search results. Obviously, Business Insider, I've been in Newsweek, Business Insider, Chicago Sun-Times, a lot of newspapers, so forth. These journals have very, they will push you up higher in the Google searches, but also university publications. So I've been interviewed at my alumni magazine, Dartmouth and Boston College Law School and so forth, magazines and so forth, and articles. And I'm mentioned in some articles by some university professors. So when that happens, that also, they have a higher credibility rate in the Google algorithm. That Google won't tell you that, but that's factually, it's kind of obvious. The higher the credibility rate, the higher it's going to push your name and stuff about you higher up in the Google searches. So I'm on, like, hey, when I gave a talk, for example, I gave a talk. I teach meditation, but I also have the Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation work that I do, right? So I gave a talk in 2015 at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. So those of you who don't know, the Commonwealth Club is a famous club. You can Google it. It was founded in 1903, and Teddy Roosevelt, who was the president of the United States at the time, went and delivered the opening speech of the inauguration of the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. And it has, I don't know how many members, tens of thousands of members, but and they're on NPR, I think once a week. I think they have a Commonwealth Club talk. And anyway, I spoke there. The only spot that was available over the next 2 or 3 years was the Monday at noon spot, because who wants to Monday at noon? Nobody's going to show up, right? And this is live audience, okay, only live audience. I'm not famous enough to yet to warrant the NPR slot, So Monday at noon. So I said, I'll take it. I don't care. I can tell people in my marketing, to your question, I can put that on my website. I spoke at the Commonwealth Club. And maybe that'll help me with my Google search, whatever. So search results. So my friend who was on the board there, George, he said, yeah, if 20 or 30 people show up for a Monday noon, that's a good audience. That's a good crowd. He's managing my expectations, right? So around Thursday, he said, wow, we got 30 people, Thursday. And so Monday at noon, okay, this is the Thursday a few days before, because I could get in like 3 months instead of 3 years before. I said, I'll take it. It's okay. So now it's like 3 days before, and we got 30 people. Oh, wow, okay. Friday close of business, he checked in with the staff. 40 people. All right. And they gave me the smallest room, so the place wouldn't look empty, right? If if only got 10 or 15 people, I didn't care how many people showed up. And I get there Monday at noon. Every seat was taken, 95 people.
Wow.
And Business Insider was there, sent a reporter. Four news outlets came. 3 of them were Chinese oriented because what is this Asian guy speaking at the Commonwealth Club? So I was on the evening news in China, they told me the next day to 100 million people, that 2-minute clip. It's on my website. Yeah, 2-minute clip of me on the evening news in China, 100 to 100 million people. And then, and the biggest Chinese American newspaper in Chinese, it's written in Chinese characters, in North America, sent a reporter, and Business Insider. Well, Business Insider, very, very, they're the ones who leaked the Hillary Clinton. Their claim to fame back then was like Hillary Clinton's got a server in her house or something. I think Business Insider was the one who somehow publicized that. So they just catapulted, way up there in the media world. Anyway, they sent a reporter. They stopped the counter on it, but the last time I looked at the counter about 45 years ago, it was at 30,000 views. Just the article that the guy wrote, and they interviewed me for about an hour and a half in the green room after I gave the talk. Plus, they had a film crew there. There were 2 film crews there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I say that as a tip to people. If you can find a place like that has high credibility itself, and then news organizations hear about it, they may send people to cover you that you don't even know. And then boom, I was the number one for about a year and a half after that, because of the Business Insider article about me. I was the number one spot on the first page of anything related to fear of death, anxiety about death, nervousness about death, any words that are like that. I was the number one spot for a year and a half.
Wow.
And I'm still I think I'm on the first page now, still at the bottom of the first page, but I'm still high up there. But for a year and a half, 2 years, I was the number one spot on the first page. So I was just barraged from people around the world.
That's incredible. What who would have thought the Monday noon spot? There you go.
Yeah, Monday noon, right? Monday noon. Who goes to Monday at noon? This is back when this is 2014, 15, people are still going to offices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, given that, speak about some challenges that you've had. I mean, you're obviously able to stay calm under pressure, but what are some challenges that you've had about as you're growing your business? How did you address those?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that I had was during COVID, actually. And it was a scheduling issue for me, because I never turn, if you go to my website, so it says a number of places on all my websites, I never turn anybody away for financial reasons, because my mission is to help people, and my personal desire is to help people. And I help people. So that means if they cannot pay, I will help them. And as you know, because you're one of my students, I give lifetime follow-up, no extra charge. I don't charge extra after I've taught the person to meditate. They can email me, text me, they can schedule with me to meditate with me privately after they've taken the 4-day class and so forth. I don't charge extra for that. So there's a lot of, whatever the word is, user user need, or whatever we want to call it, out there that can be expressed at times. And during COVID, it was really crazy because I was teaching seniors and people who were out of work for free. So I was teaching the biggest challenge I've had recently, which was what, 3 years ago now. It's crazy. It's been that long. 2020. Okay. During 6 months in 2020, I was teaching every weekend, and I was 4 months booked up in advance.
Wow.
Yeah, my classes were booked up, and I was teaching every weekend, and my classes were booked up 4 months in advance. And so teaching every weekend, you've taken the class, it's 3 days in a row, and then a couple weeks later is the last class. And so that means that I had to stagger all the classes. So I was literally teaching multiple classes every day, multiple group classes on Zoom. I was using GoToMeeting, I think, initially, or maybe I was on Zoom back then. I was on Zoom in 2020, but multiple meetings every day, and it was like Burnoutville, right? And what am I doing? I got to walk my talk, right? So I had to cut back. I decided after 6 months of that, I said, this is crazy, I cut back. And so now I'm back to teach. I'm just teaching once a month, and my classes will book up 3-4 months in advance, and it's okay. And that's just, people got to deal with it, because I have to live my life, and I'm in quasi semi-retirement, although I work full time, but it's my schedule, right? Because it's me, and me. So I go to swim, as you know, and I do my power walking, and I exercise, and I take care of myself. But that was the most challenging time. I taught 200 people to meditate that 1 year. And out of the 200, I counted 84 of them were free. No charge, because they couldn't pay me. Right? And so, and I still have that policy, I'll make less money. It doesn't matter to me. I'm here to help people. Right? So I still have the policy of nobody gets turned away for financial reasons for any of my classes.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that was the biggest challenge.
That's incredible. You really are living your mission. That's awesome. So tell us about your books, because I've read them and they're fantastic.
Yeah. So I have 2 books out, and a third book is coming out in May 1st, whenever that is. It's like a month-ish or so, right? Like 5 weeks or something. So my first book is called Overcoming the Fear of Death. That's the title of the book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. The full title of the book is Overcoming the Fear of Death Through Each of the 4 Main Belief Systems. So what's important to underscore is that the 4 main belief systems are not religious. So all of my work is non-religious. It's very spiritually oriented, I suppose you could say, from a non-religious institutional standpoint. But the belief systems I'm talking about in terms of overcoming the fear of death I'll just give it to you real quick. It's the 4 beliefs that underlie all the religious and cultural beliefs about death and dying. So, because I thought, well, how can I talk about this that doesn't step on people's religious or cultural toes? So the first belief is the science belief, that there is no afterlife. That's a belief that many people have. No afterlife, no heaven, no nothing. You die, your brain shuts off, and your mind shuts off. That's belief system number 1. Belief system number 2 is believe in an afterlife. Call it heaven, Valhalla, whatever you want to call it, depending on your culture, religion, and so forth. But belief that the mind continues, or the consciousness, or the soul, or the spirit, people use different words, continues, but there's fear. So I call it the fear of continued existence. That's the second belief system. Third belief system is no fear, but they believe in a continued existence, but no fear. And the fourth belief system is reincarnation. Past lives, future lives, you can have future lives and so forth. Or you can come back if you want to, or you don't have to, whatever, but reincarnation, that's the fourth belief system. So everybody falls somewhere in there. Now, you may be a hybrid. There's a lot of, I help a lot of people who say they're a first belief system believer, but they have fears about it. And their fears sometimes make no logical sense. And we talk about that and I help them think it through, et cetera, more clearly. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes they need to reduce their anxiety because their chemistry is way off too. Their cortisol, adrenaline, lactic acid, and 40 to 60 other hormones and chemicals are off, out of balance. In other words, when I say off balance. And so the meditation helps with that, as you know. I was I was a test subject when I was 20 years old in the very first medical studies done in the US on any kind of meditation by that Harvard Medical School professor. The second book is Marcus Aurelius Updated. That's the title of the second book. Marcus Aurelius Updated. The full title is Marcus Aurelius Updated 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. So in this title, I'm using the word meditations in a different way from the way you and I have talked about it and taught you. It's more thinking about, contemplative, thinking about how to live life in a way that's more productive, effective, and therefore happier and with less suffering. So that's a collection of 67 essays that I've written on all kinds of topics, emotional topics, happiness, friendship, forgiveness, love, self-interest. There's a chapter on meditation in this book with 11 or 12 essays in it. And then there's a chapter on spiritual, again, non-religious, but spiritually oriented topics like free will and destiny and virtue, dualism versus non-dualism, karma, ego, etc. Yeah, and there's also a chapter on life principles, things like being self-interested versus self-centered. What's the difference? Giving and taking. Yeah, so this transcending cruelty is another essay that's in here. So 67 essays I've written about all different topics. And they're both available on all the online booksellers, et cetera, et cetera. The first one I do an audio book of. I may get around to doing an audio book of the second one too, but they both have ebooks and paperback versions. My third book, which is coming out, as I said, in a month or 5 weeks or something, is called After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives. So my memories go back 6,000 years now. I didn't even believe in reincarnation when this started happening to me in the late 1970s. And it took me a while to really accept my own, within my own self, that my experiences were real. I talk about that in the book. I lay out, it's really a series of stories in the book, personal stories about me and my journey, and going through having memories, as I said, to go back around 6,000 years, a couple of dozen different lifetimes, different amounts of memories from different lifetimes. But what have they taught me about myself? That's really what the book is about. What have they taught me about myself and who I am today? That's essentially the nut of the book. So that's coming out soon. And I'll probably do an audio book of that one at some point, but it'll come out in print and ebook first. Yeah.
Well, you're a tremendous writer, and I love the Marcus Aurelius book because it's so cool, because they're essays, so you can jump around a little bit if you want, and then you can go back to them and you can really kind of dive into how they, and reflect upon what they mean to you. So it's really good.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I recommend people read it. Look at the table of contents. I may have said this to you, I can't remember, but look at the table of contents, see what title jumps out at you, what topic jumps out at you, read that one.
Yeah, it's really neat. Mine is like dog-eared now with all of little notes and things in it. It's really good.
Yeah, great.
So, what do you think you would have done looking back now? What do you think you would have done differently if you had something that you could change, or something that would have saved you? I mean, you gave some tips earlier, but something that would have saved you time or made things a little bit easier in running your business.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do next lifetime. So this is probably going to answer your question. All right? Because
There we go.
it's based on what I'm going to say is based on my experience this lifetime, right? So because I have the ability to do so many things, like we were talking about before we started this podcast, it's picking which one to do in order to make a living, in order to raise a family, which I'm sure I'm going to want to do next time around too, because I'm not a recluse. You know, I love children and so forth, and the family, you know, dynamic, et cetera, et cetera. But the but on that is, so that's you know, need to, you know, have enough income to raise the family, whatever that is, you know, what, you know, come back in 100 years or 150 years or 500 years, whatever it is. I'm sure there's going to be some need to put a roof and food in the mouth and the roof over the head. So, but what I really love to do is what I'm doing, right? And I love to write, and I love to share my perspectives and approaches of thinking about things, not proselytizing as in preaching, but teaching as in creating independent thinking minds, more independent thinking minds who can think a little bit more clearly about their lives in the world. Because I view, as you know, you've heard me say this in classes, I view myself as a seed planter. I'm planting seeds in your mind and other people's minds. And then you're going to go plant some of those seeds in other people's minds, and maybe they'll help, they'll germinate in somebody else's mind and help them grow and develop personally, spiritually, internally, emotionally, whatever way you want to look at, physically even, in a way that's a little bit healthier. So in order to do that, whatever the construct is going to be when I come back, whenever it is, if I come back in 50 or 150 or 550 years from now, I'm going to do something that has a business component that has multipliers in it, like, for example, in our world culture today, real estate, so that you can if you do it wisely enough, then you can have a multiplier effect and have a steady stream of income, and then I can do whatever I want to do.
Yeah, that's a good goal. You've done such a wonderful job of turning your purpose into what you do, so that you can also live your best life. And I wonder if you have any advice for people who have this I don't want to use the word passion because it's overused, but who have this calling, this purpose to do something, and they want to turn it into a similar thing that you've turned your purpose into. What advice might you give somebody that is going down that road?
Well, I mean, looking back on this lifetime, I would say I'm glad that I had the jobs that I had in order to sock away enough money to have Social Security at pretty much the maximum level to support me. That's the bottom line there, right? Now, you don't have to make a huge amount of money, but you need to have regular income for 35 years. That's the baseline. Though maybe people don't know that, but you need 35 years. And there were a number of years in there. I think I have the chart, so, you know, somewhere they send you the thing. I can go online and look. I could look at my thing, but it's like 10 or 12 years. I had little or no income. So I'm not really at the max. So to me, I would say max that out. You know, because I know people who have not made huge amounts of salary, but they've had more than 35 years of regular salary income. Okay. That's assuming you're not born with a silver spoon in your mouth, like I was not. You know, I grew up in a middle-class family. All right. So I'm talking to those people who are like me, not the other people who I went to Dartmouth College with, who grew up with their spoon in their mouth, gold spoon in their mouth. Never mind a silver, platinum spoon in their mouth, some of them. Okay. So Now they're hedge fund trade. Well, okay, you're a hedge fund trader, your guy now, but you started with $100 million from your dad. Anyway, I'm not talking to those people, but like, I have friends now who are their Social Security is max. They're getting the max. What does she tell me? I think she's getting high 3,000, something like 3,000 something every month, and from Social Security, and she only made around $70,000 a year. Okay, I made a lot more than that in some of these law firms, but I had 10 or 12 years with goose eggs because I was teaching meditation, right? When I was in my 20s, okay, in early 30s. So that's a tip. And the other is just not to buy stuff. I wasn't big on this, but I've had family members who have been. Don't buy stuff you really don't need. And I think that's a huge thing. There's a huge source of money that people could be socking away for their retirement on not buying an extra hamper. I mean, just little things, they all add up. Okay, now you just spent $250 at Marshall's. Well, you're not buying stuff at Neiman Marcus. Okay, you're not buying a $600 hamper at Neiman Marcus, but you just bought 3 hampers at Marshall's, and you spent $250. Like, do you really need them? That kind of stuff. But it looks so beautiful. And then, okay, fine. I'm not saying you can't have nice looking things, but my habit has been, I'll pay extra money for a nice suit and not buy one every year, or I'll buy a nice chair and that's really comfortable, and not have 3 other chairs that are not really comfortable, but they look really nice and around the room. So, I mean, things like that. To me it's frugal and saves money. Now, those are personal preferences for me. Okay, not everybody's like me. I understand that, but being frugal and then saving more. It's easy to say when you're older. When you're 20 or 30 years old, it's almost impossible to convince anybody that young. But sometimes I do talk to them when they ask me, my students, because I have lots of young students. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we work with. As you know, we work with the K through 12 population, and it's something that we try. Sometimes you hear the word entrepreneur and you think, oh, that, like, you associate that with Richard Branson or some of these people who are super, super out of control wealthy. But they didn't start that way. And you have to be scrappy and you have to be frugal when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, because the reality of it is that these big investors that people see, the big Shark Tank, that really isn't the normal way.
That's the stuff that gets people's. That's the glitter. That's the sparkle and glitter that gets people's attention. People don't hear about all the entrepreneurs who failed. Their businesses have failed. And that doesn't make the news, because who wants to hear that? So they don't hear about it, but it's reality. And so I've never had a problem wearing multiple hats. I've never had a problem stuffing envelopes back in the day. In fact, I had one job as a temporary agent. This is going to go in my next book, which is going to be all about my life, this lifetime, stories about this 20th and 21st century lifetime of Kelvin Chin, where I was, I wasn't licensed in California. We had just moved there and didn't know anybody really. And this was 1989. And I had a temp job and at an ad agency, and they had me stuffing envelopes, fold it 3 times, put in an envelope. And the office manager came up to me. All she knows is I came from a temp agency. She doesn't know anything about my educational background or anything, or what I'd done in my life, and she said, you're the best envelope stuffer we've ever had here. I just want you to know that. That story's going in my book, because you have to have humility if you're going to be an entrepreneur. You have to You cannot be thinking you're going to be Richard Brandt. This is what people tell you. All you have to do is just think and imagine and close your eyes that you're like Richard Brandt. Just close your eyes and imagine that. No, you got to roll your sleeves up and you got to do the stuff that makes that happen. So that's what nobody wants to hear. Okay.
Right. And we talk to students a lot about that, and that how you don't hear about the failures. So we try to prepare students, like you might start a business, you might fail, but that doesn't mean you can't get back up and see what happened and start again. And you have to have that mentality of that could happen. You don't want it to, but it could happen. And like you said, it's not publicized. So you turn that on yourself. Oh, I'm a failure.
Yeah. Right. You need two things. They need two things. You need resilience, and you need the emotional. I call it in my book, my new book, you'll hear I talk about myself. Not everybody has this, and not everybody will have this. But if you can somehow try to start to stimulate, even if it's not part of your wiring, like it's part of my wiring, which is the emotional need to understand. I have an emotional need to understand. Not everybody does, and not everybody will. But even the people who don't have an emotional need to understand things, if they can understand that is a valuable emotional need to have, and they can start to steer their mind in that direction, even if it's not part of their wiring like it is for me, they can start to develop that, even if it's not part of their wiring. And because if you don't have resilience, then you're just going to crawl into a cave, and just, I failed, I'm never going to do it again. Okay, that's lacking resilience. So you need to have a certain amount of resilience and confidence to move forward. Okay, that's where the meditation technique I teach helps build that up, right? As you know. But the emotional need to understand is equally important, because if you don't have that, you're just going to fail again, because you're going to do the same stupid things that you did that caused you to fail in the first place. You don't have an emotional need to understand, because you're not curious. You don't care. I'm just going to bull in the china shop, do it again. And this time I'm just going to do it harder and faster and with more effort. That's what everybody says. This is what, they tell you on TV. Effort. You just have to try. Get out on the football field and push harder on the guy who's trying to block you, and you just run through him. No, you could actually run around him. Have you ever thought of that? Emotional need to understand the nuances, the gray areas, because the gray areas of life is where life happens. Anybody who's paid attention to life knows it's not the black and white. It's the gray areas where we need to pay attention, and that's where we can learn, and that's where we can navigate around obstacles. We don't have to crush the obstacle like many of these workshops tell us. No, you can actually work smarter, and you can get around them and not be injured by them and then have to recuperate. You can actually work smarter and figure out ways, if you have a little bit stimulating that emotional need to understand what went on and learn from one's mistakes. That's the phrase people always say, learn from your mistakes. Well, what does that mean? That means, to me, you have to develop somewhat of a default. That's why I say emotional need for understanding, because you can intellectually say, I need to understand, and then not, because you're not emotionally driven by it. You're driven by your emotions. We all are, not just you, me, everybody. We all are. Our emotions are our default. And so to the extent that we can inculcate an emotional, now how can you do that? You do that by starting to see that, oh, I really wanted to do that. There's an emotion and an intellectual component to what I just said there, right? I really wanted to do that. I did it, and it worked. That starts to feed this emotional need to understand, because it's feeling fed emotionally, and the understanding helped feed the emotion. It's just a feeding loop that then snowballs in a positive way. Anyway, that's what I've learned about myself.
We talk about what we call the entrepreneurial mindset, and it's a lot of the things that you just described, and that curiosity is huge, because if you're not curious and you're not solving a problem for somebody, you're not in good shape to stay in business.
The other thing is huge that people, amazing to me, don't do. And I know this from past lives being on the battlefields. And I know from this current life being on the battlefields, if you want to call them, of business and law, is how few people look at things from their customer's standpoint. I mean, people will say that mantra, but do they actually do it and practice it all the time? No. It just blows my mind. Really? If you're on the battlefield, you look at things from your opponent's standpoint. If you're in a legal negotiation, you look at things from your opponent's, your adversary's standpoint, and you anticipate what he or she is going to do. And you have a plan to counter that. If you have customers with whom you have a mutually beneficial relationship, you want to help meet their needs. You look at what are their needs, how can I meet them? It's amazing how people will say that, but then they don't execute on it, right? It sounds simple, but it's not common. It's unfortunately rare.
Well, it's because everyone's emotional, and what means something to me, I think everybody wants this thing, but maybe they don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to readjust and see, wow, I thought everybody wanted this, but they don't, but they're really interested in this. Okay, well, change to this.
Yep, that's awesome. That we talk about that with our students all the time, and our educators. It's your deep customer empathy has to come first, or nothing else matters.
You know, unless it's to a certain point, I suppose there is a point at which you can say, you know what, they really want that, but that's not me.
Yeah.
And that's not what my mission is. I've run into that. You know, that's not my mission. That's not what we're doing. Okay. We're not doing psychotherapy, you know, and they may not have called it that, the students, my clients, but that's not what I do. So then I refer them out and I tell them, you know, that's not my wheelhouse, da, 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 da. So it's not complying, acquiescing to everything the client or the customer says or wants or needs. You have to stay in your lane too. Yeah.
So we're gonna close, but I would love for you to share with everybody, how can people reach you if they want to learn more about you or your books or your courses, all those things. You mentioned them before, but mention them again, and we'll put them in the show notes.
Sure. Probably one of the easiest things to do, you get my name, as long as you spell my name right. It's Kelvin, Kelvin Chin, Chin. You Google my name and then you'll see, because I got 2 pages of Google will pop up with all my stuff. And or you can go to my main website, which is kelvinchin.org, kelvinchin.org. And on the bottom of any page on any of my websites, I have 4 websites. So the bottom of any page of any of the websites are the hot links to the other 3. So you don't have to remember what the other 3 are. Just go to the bottom of any page of my websites and you'll see hot links to the other 3. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. That link is also on the bottom of every page of my websites. Yeah, check out my books. So I have 2 out, and a 3rd one's coming out. In the preview of my 3rd book is on my book website. Kelvin H. Chin Author is my, which is it's kelvinhenrychin.com is the website. But yeah, just go to kelvinchin.org. That's the easiest one. It's my name.org. And then go to the bottom of the page and you can link to all the other ones. That's the easiest thing.
Awesome. Well, Kelvin, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been such a fun conversation and so informative. I'm very grateful that you made the time for us here at the EntreEd Talk podcast.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure. It's always great to chat with you, Toy.
Likewise.